Welcome to the EMN podcast, where philosophy meets disaster and uncomfortable truths meet the profession we call emergency management. This is not safe space thinking, this is the arena. Let's begin. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are at in this fine world. First of all, I don't know, Andrew, if I ever said that, give you the full credit for that Star Wars introduction on May 4th. I've gotten a lot of comments on that, and people are like, "How did you do that?" I'm like, "I didn't." I said, "Andrew did it." That was the only thing I did too is add this sound.
It's right. I'll have my agent contact you, and we'll figure out the royalties.
It was fantastic. My son thought it was my son, who's a Star Wars fan, thought it was a little campy, but I'm okay with campy.
I think you look great as a Jedi. I think
Thank you.
Jedi Master.
And your hair was fantastic in that.
I know. I'll never get that kind of hair again.
Oh man! So, project I've been working on for a bit, Andrew, and I know you and I talked about it. Is this 48 Laws of Emergency Management, and obviously it's inspired by the 48 Laws of Power, and how you can, maneuver through work, right? And one of the things we talk a lot about, especially in the field of emergency management, is how do we get a seat at the table? How do we make that work? And why aren't we doing more? And that's kind of what got me thinking about this. Why I started working on that. And this is a few years of kind of work together that I've been put together, and now it's live, right? And we put the first one out last week. Today or Sunday was law number 1, and it's going to be 12 weeks of this process. And why is it, when we start taking a look at the concept of the 48 Laws of Emergency Management, what's the importance of that? What's the importance of outside the box thinking? What's the importance of having those conversations within our field?
Well, I think it's part of any healthy practice is to question the existing dogma, so to speak, so that we don't just get comfortable with, oh, well, that's always the way that we've done it, and it's always been effective. If you question any emergency manager who I think is respected in the field, they will tell you themselves there's always something to learn. There's always something to improve upon. And so when we sort of rest on our laurels and we're fine with what exists, that's why we always do after action reviews to see what didn't work well. That's always usually what we focus on. What didn't work well, but we also should look at what worked well. What did work well? What could use enhancement? What can we continue to build on, continue to practice, and make it better? And I think, ultimately, if we're not questioning, if we're not, I think that there's a creative discontent, if you will, that exists within every emergency manager, that we don't just accept what we do on a regular basis. Yes, we go on based upon our muscle memory, but I think anyone who you ask any folks, and you've interviewed a lot of folks, I've interviewed a lot of folks. One of those underlying things is, what am I missing? What am I not seeing that I need to be looking at? Who am I not covering? And we've always had those moments where, wait a minute, was this actually deployed? Are we looking at this community? Are we dealing with this issue? Whatever that might be, whether it might be disabilities, access, and functional needs, whether it might be some communications and channel getting out there that we're not reaching certain folks with, those sorts of things.
Nicholas Taleb wrote the book Black Swan. It was realistically more on economics than it was about disasters, but we've really kind of embraced that concept of the Black Swan and the disaster event. And people would argue that COVID was a black swan. I think Michelle Vuker has a better analogy of the gray rhinos. These are things that we should be knowing, things that have, for lack of a better term, hints that they're out there. But on the other side of it, we don't plan for them. And I would put put COVID into that, because we did have a lot of other concepts of SARS, MARS, all that kind of stuff. So, bringing all these different analogies into this conversation regarding the 48 laws, that's one of the things that I believe that we should be thinking about, and what for the 48 laws goes into play is, how do we see these things that are impacting the field of emergency management, whether it's existential crisis, um, whether it's the black swan, gray rhinos, the
Mhm.
events that are happening, whether it is things against the profession. What I mean by that is people that say, "Hey, let's move emergency management back under fire, back under police," all those type of things. These are the conversations that we should be having as a profession, and this is what the concept of the 48 laws are. And Nick popped in here, real said.
Yeah, I can do that.
It's like, could be that the box needs to be realized before we start trying to think outside the box. Absolutely. Or less metaphorically, should we concentrate on realizing EM as a profession with a stable set of expectations and procedures that the public expects before we turn it on its head? It's a good point, Nick. I mean, you have three good points inside there, or three good questions, I should say. Is are we looking at um, do we even have a box to look outside of? Let's start with that one first. Do we have a box to look outside of? It is taking a look at those. The 48 laws as I'm writing them is really trying to take a look outside that box. But do we have a box we're even in?
And I would argue we're still building that box, if you will, that
Mm,
we're still trying to figure out what the parameters are. If you ask anyone in the public, they can elucidate what a fire department and a fire chief is responsible for, or a police chief and law enforcement is responsible for, and so forth, right? When it comes to emergency management and an emergency management director or manager in a given jurisdiction, whether that's a local town, small city, large city, county, state, territorial, tribal, etc. I'm going to go through the whole acronym list of SLTT. It's that, it depends on what state you're looking at and their understanding and the maturity in that area. And I would say, we're going through revitalization, if you will, given the pressures that are going on right now. And I think Nick has a great point here in that, we're still trying to figure out those parameters, if you will. There are some competencies, there's the core capabilities, there's EMAP, those sorts of things out there. But, again, forgive my statement here because I am a project manager and a project management professional. There is a project management body of knowledge, and there are other standards that are out there in the world that are given out there. But there is the ISO standard that is accepted, is the PMBOK standard, or project management body of knowledge. So it's understood. Now, there's various practices around, or there's various industries where it's practiced, whether it's pharmaceutical, IT, engineering, automotive, whatever that might be, new product development, software, etc. Practices are different, but there's a commonality that they all share in some way, shape, or form. So I think that's sort of, if we look at that as on a comparative basis, I think that's where we're probably heading, and maybe 10, 20 years behind where the Project Management Institute was at some point, for where we need to be as a practice. That's at least my take on things.
yeah, absolutely. I believe I'm in your camp on that side there, Andrew, and looking at what Nick is saying here regarding um, concentrate on realizing EM as a profession with a stable set of expectations. And I'm taking that question or the comment that he wrote, and breaking it into two pieces. So yes, we have that part, and this is what you're talking about is stabilizing emergency management with those common expectations, right? With our, well, we do have a set of standards, we do have core competencies, we do have those things that we're putting out there, we do have a code of ethics, right? But on the other side of it, though, is on Nick's point, is the public perception of what we are and who we are. And you know as I say all the time, get out from behind your keyboard and go out there and meet the public,
Mm-hmm.
where they're at. And we have a fundamental problem in emergency management when it comes to public expectations that we are the only, well, I should say the only, maybe it's a broad brush on this one. We are one of the few professions that people understand the federal job of what we do
Mhm.
better than the local job, right? And what I
Mhm.
mean by
Yep,
this is when we think about local
that's right.
police departments, no one compares them to the, oh, you're the FBI for the local, you know what I mean?
That's
But
right.
when we look at emergency management, we're the, oh, you're the FEMA for us,
Yeah.
and that's, whether it's good press or bad press. I don't know which way I look at that when it comes to FEMA, but I mean
Well,
that's where we're at.
it's interesting. So, Craig Fugate had pushed out a piece over the weekend, which was interesting. It's a very long piece, and I appreciate that. He put a lot of time into it. That's clear there. Sort of, I think the gross misunderstanding that we've had, and I think, look, the FEMA 2.0, the FEMA Council report. I know they changed the name of it. They're not calling it FEMA 2.0 at this point. Um, it I think it really pushes this idea, which we all know and accept, and that is, all emergency response starts at the local level. We all understand that. We get that, right? But that's not the public's general understanding. If you ask the general public, who's your local emergency manager? Who's in charge of that? I recently was at a dinner party this past weekend, and I met some folks from San Francisco. Great city, wonderful. But the folks, and I know who the emergency manager is there. They don't know who it is. Nor should they know who that person is, right? They probably couldn't name the police chief or fire chief in
Right.
that area, right? But when something happens, they know that something needs to happen. It needs to be done, right, to manage that in the background. And I think that, but their perception of what that is, it's so hidden from what they do, almost like a chief information officer for the city of San Francisco. Very essential to what they do in San Francisco, but doesn't, is not seen, not heard from, but we don't diminish the value of that chief information officer for that city.
I'm not dreaming the fact that the people know who the emergency manager of their city. I mean, for most
Right.
cities that you talk to, people don't even know who their in California, at least. I mean, people don't even know who their city manager is, let alone, So I mean, that's not what I'm saying, though. But at least they know what a city manager does,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
If you say the planning department, they have an idea what the planning department does because they're forward facing, right? You know,
Yeah.
when you say you're an emergency manager, they're like, oh, what is that? For that, I mean, even if you said chief information officer, they would have an understanding of what that role does. You know, for the most part, because there's parallels to the to their business, right? You know, um, if you work in there's an IT department at least in most businesses, right? And so that's my point is there are those things that that the public knows, and this is where going back to the 48 laws of power of emergency management
Mhm.
is some of this. What we're talking about, what I'm writing about, is getting out and understanding your community. And it doesn't have to be everybody. It doesn't. I'm not saying like every single person in your community needs to know who you are, what you do, but man, at least like the Chamber of Commerce should know who you are, or at least how to get a hold of you. Your Lions Club, your you know Rotary Club, those things should have an. I mean, they're always asking for speakers. I mean, you
Yep.
could probably, I mean, having those relationships with those organizations that infiltrate
Yeah.
in a good way, not a bad
Yeah.
way. Infiltrate sounds bad,
Absolutely.
impact maybe is a better one, and the community as a whole, right?
Yep.
I think those are the things that we need to be doing. And when we ask for that seat at the proverbial table, um, that's how you get that because you have the numbers behind you that they understand. And we as a profession or as a job, if you want to argue the concept of profession, I know there's some friends out there that will write to me later on. We're not a profession, we can get into that. Um, but yeah, so um, Robert says, a very true in the separation of ICS and NIMS that most Leos I train with don't have a large picture of emergency management in general. And that's a problem. That's a problem when our allies, I guess, out there don't even know what we do, right? You
Yeah.
know, I mean, it's, some guys in the police department go, oh, even when emergency management's in the police department, they don't really understand what that person does down the hallway. You know,
Yep.
So
And I think it's interesting. I had 2 weeks ago, I was in San Diego, had a great opportunity to teach the 1 day workshop. And one of the participants was a young emergency manager. And he asked me, so how do I gain, some recognition for the work that we're doing? Because oftentimes what we do is behind the scenes. And I think that speaks directly to what you're just mentioning. You do need to get out and you do need to speak to people. And to a certain degree, I know folks don't like to have to do this, but I think it's a necessary part of the job is to promote or to use the levers that you have if you've got folks in communications. If you have somebody who's your PIO or you have someone who manages communications within your government, whatever, what have you, carve out some time to have some lunch or coffee with them and then just see, can you get on their agenda to push something out? Give them the basic, raw information, what your, single overarching communications objective is to get out there to the public, but let it be known. Do it on a frequent basis enough. I'm not saying you need to be in front of the cameras or on podcasts on a regular basis, like we are, I guess, but promote what it is that you're doing. So there's more awareness, as if folks in the political atmosphere, your city council, your mayor, your city manager sees you out there, they're more aware of the work that you're doing as opposed to it sort of being hidden in the background. And again, that doesn't have to be a majority of your work, but if it's a small percentage, and then you can leverage that with the folks that do communications, that can help to sell what it is you're doing.
And I've talked about that too. Is like it is dangerous if your city council doesn't know who you are,
Mm-hmm.
right? It is not a good thing when they're like, oh, who's that guy? You know what I mean? Or who's that? What's that department? If you have a department, because when cuts start to come down the road, it's easy to cut things that you don't understand or don't know. And that's one of those things. Like I recommend knowing every director in your city, or if you work for a hospital or a college or whatever, get to know them at least professionally speaking by name, and potentially, I would say if you can, it depends on how large your organization is, at least go to a lunch with them or coffee with them, or schedule some time, even if it's a half an hour, just to go meet them in their office and say who you are, what you do, and how. And then the question is, when you go there, don't say, "Oh, how this is how I expect help from you." Again, ask them how you can be assistance to them, because they're gonna go, "Oh, well." And then when you say, "Hey, when the crap hits the fan, you know, um, this is what it is. This is what I could do for you." I'm gonna add one more thing to this. I want to get into Nick's comment. Um, you know, One of the things that I think is very important to me, and I've done this at every jurisdiction I've worked at, is bringing in public works as part of your team, right? Because they're forgot about a lot. We always think of fire and police, and
Mm.
it is amazing how when you start talking to the public works director or the superintendent, and they're just like, "Yeah, thank you for having me part of this conversation," and the support that you get just by saying, go to your community development team and just say how important they are from the economic side and how can you support them. There are
Yep.
so many things that they need help for and they don't understand when it comes to emergency management. And then if you have those conversations with them on a one-on-one, that relationship that's built is critical. And then when things start to happen, when you see budget cuts and stuff,
Yep.
you're not fighting against them. They're going, hey, this is an asset to me. So, Nick, yeah, talked about Shin Godzilla. Um, you may have turned me on to that show, Nick. I believe that it was you. Now that I think about, I watched that, and you're absolutely right. That I when I talked about disaster movies, my favorite emergency management movie, Shin Godzilla is the one that I say all the time because it really shows how an EOC works in a disaster, and you take the monster out of it and add it as a storm or add it as whatever you want to add that monster being the disaster. It really is a great way to introduce this thing. And I actually used it for my students, and we watched that movie together one day out of the class, and we have a conversation about it and what that really means. And I thank you for that too, by the way. And yeah, so I agree with you 100%. But you know what? That's a really neat way to introduce this to people who don't understand emergency management, what it is that you can even tell your elected officials, hey, if you have a Sunday afternoon where you want to watch a good disaster movie, watch Shin Godzilla. You can actually see how that works. I mean, it shows everything. It shows the policy group, and it the one part where they break off and they have actually two emergency operations teams work at the same time. It is a fantastic movie for emergency management. And thanks for the comment, Nick. But it's a good way to
show. Great
show.
assignment for that, right? Have them watch the movie and then bring them together, right, to talk about.
Yeah, and you can just tell them, hey, the monster part is the disaster, right? The part that you need to be paying attention to, and is what they're doing within the EOC and the policy group and the decision making process that goes on. It's a wonderful movie for that, and highly recommend it. If you guys have not watched it, you are doing yourself a disservice. I would watch it in English first, and then you can watch it with Japanese with the subtitles, and you get more out of it. Same.
How old is that movie?
I don't know. I have to look it up.
That's all right.
Nick, maybe Nick, if you're still there. Nick, if you're still there, how old is that movie? It's pretty old now. It's older now.
Maybe we should have a whole podcast devoted to the Shin Godzilla that we engage with the audience. I think maybe we can invite Nick on board and we can discuss it.
Yeah, Nick, if you're down for that, I'd love to do that. We did that once. Yeah, that'd be fantastic. But but that's the thing is like when you look at influence, and part of the 48 laws is influence, right? And truly, obviously we're not writing policy. We can influence policy though. And to build influence, you need to have relationships. And to have those relationships, you need to have understanding and why they should meet with you. And pointing people to those things like Shin is a good example of how you can build a relationship. Because we all talk about the disaster movie of Volcano, right? Because for people who are of our age, the Gen Z people are like, what the heck are you talking about? But I mean,
that's the public's perception of what an emergency manager is.
I would love to have that as the perception of what emergency management is. Like when Tommy Lee Jones walks out there and starts yelling at the police and fire, and they listen to him. God, that would be fantastic. But
I saw that again when I was out in San Diego because I was done for the night and I had to watch that, and it never fails to make me laugh.
I would love to have that as being a perception of what we do, even if it's false. I mean, if you watch like all the fire shows and the EMS shows and the police shows, I mean, all of the 99% of what they maybe it's a bigger broad, at least 50% of what's on those shows is bunk, right? I mean, it's just like all. You watch, you go, oh, I mean, my wife doesn't allow me to watch any of these shows with her because I complain about them. But at least it's bunk that's people are getting an idea. Although right. I guess with that move, with Law and Order, and this is kind of one of those, a bad part about it is people believe that crimes can be solved in in an hour. They don't understand how long it really truly takes for things to be done. Right. But I mean, I'd rather have that problem than the problem not knowing who you are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I know we were talking about before we got on the air that you had a challenge that you wanted to, do. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that and see if people want to pick up on it.
Well, I think that to get to your point about the 48 laws, and I think you refer to it as laws, not best practices. I would say, I disagree with that to a degree. I think we do have some better practices that we have there. I don't think that we call them best because better always means that there's some level of improvement on them. And I think, they're not necessarily they're not determined, they're descriptive more than they are prescriptive in some ways. And I say prescriptive that, essentially, if you look at the core capabilities, you look at EMAP, there's a set of capabilities that each agency is expected to have if they want to meet that, right? And yes, that is compliance based, and I talked about that with our colleague Anthony Mangieri in one of the recent podcasts for the EM Network, and came out in the article that came out today. It was pushed out today. It came out last week. I sent out a social media post today, and I think the question I would ask around our plans and things like that is a thought experiment. And I think this comes down to, are you ready? Do you consider yourself ready? Imagine that you had a cyber attack that wiped out your database, that wiped out your plans, your information. You don't even have anything on paper. Are you ready to carry out, to rebuild those systems and to actually make them work? Do you have, now, of course, I realize there's a great level of complexity depending upon where you're situated, whether you're in a state, county, local, big city, small city, town, tribal organization, whatever that might be, whether it's in public health or in your environment, DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, whatever that is, you have that muscle memory of what you're supposed to do. Can you carry that out? Would you be able to carry that out? That's the first question.
I would say with my department specifically, I'm confident that we're 4 deep.
Right? You're what?
4 deep. Four
Okay.
people really have the ability to function in that. And else, to various different degrees, right? Probably have a couple of people that are trained throughout the city that would be able to at least function for a bit, like understand like how to fill out paperwork and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They have some fundamental training. And, outside of the policy that is specifically inside the EOP, I would think that we could at least get the doors open and start moving things in the right direction,
Mm-hmm.
when we start looking at this. Now, if we're down, 5, 6 layers down, and then, as and in the military and the Marine Corps next up, I don't know if we go down to Lance Corporal level at the city, if we could get people leading.
So there's 2 things I want to comment to that, and I think it gets to your point, which is a second question. There is, imagine you absent yourself, you're not available, and so that gets into succession planning. Is your department, is your unit, if you're a force of 1, and there are many emergency managers out there, local emergency managers out there who are a force of 1 or are multi-hatted, they have another responsibility. Imagine they're not there. And there are many circumstances that I have read of, heard of, know of, that have been in that situation. And so that's the second thought experiment, is imagine you're not there. What happens? Who's able to carry that on? Now, I'm not going to go into that. The first question, which is you don't have your plans, are not available, etc. But I think those are 2 key questions, right? And those get to capabilities. Are you actually able to carry these things on? And the second question to that is is there enough succession planning that you're able to do that? Because as we know, because of attrition, there's a lot of folks that are, if I may say so, Todd, seasoned folks like ourselves, who've been in this world for a while, right, for decades. And we're going to be moving on. One of those folks are retiring, they're not going to be there. Is that institutional memory going to be carried forward with the next person who takes that position?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think we have that problem, right? And one of the problems that we have specifically is, how do we when we retire, right? For the shops, I have 2 points on this one here. When we retire as a shop of 1, it could be another 6 months before somebody is able to take our position, right? And by the time that goes, we're gone, right? There isn't a transition. At least with back to fire, comparing ourselves to fire and police. At least with fire and police, there's even with the turnover there, there's always the probationary firefighter or probationary police officer that's being trained by a field training officer, and they get a year and they get trained up before they go out into the field by themselves, right? With emergency management, it's guy retires, gal retires, new person comes in, and they're looking through documents trying to find what was done before. And, if you're like a couple of people I know, including myself, a lot of stuff that we do isn't always on our server. You know what I mean? It's on a laptop. You know what I mean? And does that laptop go with you, right? In some cases, or in some cases, that laptop, gets recirculated into the community, and you don't know where the information is. It's not on some sort of drive somewhere, and they're looking for that information. So that doesn't for us in emergency management. Now, I'm lucky now that I'm in a larger organization, that we're able to bring new people in and train them behind us. So that's a luxury, but it is not the same for most places. So I think there's that. And the other side of it too is, you're asking the question is, or if you can't make it, do people know what's going on? I have a few friends, and the joke was they're not allowed to go on vacation, because every time they'd go on vacation, that's when something would happen. You know, um, that's when the big fire would kick off. Would be when they were, in Hawaii or something like that. Um, and it's happened a few times. At a friend of mine whose daughter was a competitive volleyball, and it seemed like every time she had a tournament, there was some sort of event that happened with it, and we're like, Anna, you're not allowed to leave. It's because when you go, things happen. So that being said, that's those things happen. So yeah, and do the city survive? Absolutely. Are they a little bit behind the curve when the thing kicks off? Yeah, they normally are. But I think everybody eventually figures out where the plan is, and opens it up and starts looking at it.
Yeah, so that's, I think, the point, right? This is an opportunity to ask those questions and to deal with those things. It's nice to be considered essential, right? But I think that I know of in New York City, in the aftermath of 9/11, the EOC was gone. The EOC was gone because it was based in at the World Trade Center, World Trade Center 4, I believe it was. And so it received some of the damage that had come from that. And so that whole center needed to be rebuilt. And so, it's those sorts of things, and then I was reading in some of the books I'm reading now about some of the California wildfires. When that leadership's not there, who then steps in to basically make decisions? Is that emergency manager empowered to be able to take decisions without, with the understanding of what they're supposed to do, without the elected leaders necessarily needing to corral folks to carry certain things out?
Well, I mean, and that's the problem too. Is like, here, let's use California for example. Unless you live in the city that you serve, um, and there's that large earthquake, even if you live 10 miles away, I mean, how long is it going to take you?
Right.
We look at the San Andreas Fault type of event, like the Great Shakeout type event. How long could it take you to get to work? And the planet assumption already is you're looking at a 40 to 50% decrease in your workforce, just due to the fact that people can't get into the in.
Right.
Right. And then you got to take care of your house first, right? I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
can't go to your job, so like if we have the large earthquake and I'm home, I'm going to make sure my family's good first, check my house out to make sure it's safe, and then I'm going to jump in my car and try to navigate my way to work. So
Yep.
there's a delay. There's a delay for me to get in, even if I'm on the phone doing work at the same time. There's a delay for me to get into the office. On a good day, I'm an hour away. You know what I mean? So so the point about that is that plan and assumption has to go into that. There's going to be this delay of getting things kicked off. Now, if it's a planned disaster, I'm making fun of my friends in the East Coast there with snowstorms and hurricanes. If it's a planned disaster like that, yeah, we can we can be there in the EOC. But that a spontaneous disaster like an earthquake or tornado
Or wildfire, even with the wildfire,
or wildfire, yeah.
There is some notice, right? But at what level of alert were they at the LA City EOC and the county EOC? Probably yes, they were at a certain level, but I mean, were they ready for the conflagration that was going to be taking place and the level of coordination? I don't know the answer to that. I'm still that's something that I'm still in the process of doing some research and trying to figure out.
Yeah. I mean, we can get into that a little bit deeper, but there's still some of the information is not available to the public at this point. But yeah, I mean, so I mean, those are considerations, right? And it goes back in, to circle back into the 48 laws. These are conversations that you need to be having with your elected officials and with your city management, right? The city manager, bring them into fold, because if they're not understanding exactly all those points of what's happening, you truly are behind the 8 ball. Speaking of that, we're a few minutes over our 30 minutes. I do apologize to anybody who's, but the conversation, and Andrew and I get to some good conversations. This is probably why I enjoy it so much. But this is to be continued. And I'm looking forward to talking next week. We do have some guests that are going to be scheduled out to come in speaking about some of the wildfire stuff and some other things. So look forward to that. Andrew, I'll let you have last word, and then we're out of here.
One thing I just wanted to let folks know is because Todd is going to be involved in preparations and monitoring and managing that together with the team, if I may say so, at Inglewood at the Los Angeles stadium, if I have that right.
So that's correct.
For FIFA. Hopefully I got all that correct. In June, we're going to be recording a lot of sessions, correct, Todd?
Correct.
So we'll have a number of guests on. So that'll probably be in the hopper for June. So it won't be live necessarily. So stay tuned for that. And the last thing is, it's good to have your binder of plans and stuff like that. But I think to your point, Todd, it's the relationships, it's the capabilities, it's the muscle memory that really has preeminence and importance for us. Because if we aren't able to do that, we're not able to pick up the phone or text somebody or email somebody or whatever that is, Slack channel, whatever that might be, to let somebody know, hey, we're getting ready, we're doing this, that we know what their capabilities are, they know what they can expect of us, and we know how we're going to coordinate or collaborate in a certain way to get the job done.
Absolutely. And as always, a lot more to talk about this and a lot more training and a lot more conversation to go forward. Please read the 48 laws that are coming out every Sunday. I'd love to hear your comments on it. Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where I'm right. Tell me what your opinion is on these things, because this is where we grow and learn from each other. And as always, until next time, please stay safe and
when the sirens scream out loud, we're the voice that breaks the cloud. Heads out high when things go wrong, we'll guide you through its strength and song. Disaster strikes without a sound, chaos reigns but we're around. Public safety in our hands, standing strong in every land of my